Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a good night. There are many people having a really tough day today. And the reason why is because of the untimely death of Michael Brooks. Of course, we heard about it first last night through a comment on this show. But today there were testimonials all day. There were people talking about their experiences, with Michael Brooks. He had a tremendous amount of influence due to his interpersonal connections to many of the lefty live streamers who have very large audiences. He was very well known to people around the New York area. He was part of their society. He was the friend, of many people there. And by all accounts, he was a very, very good friend. As for me, I did not but know Michael. Our paths never crossed. I watched his show a number of times. I enjoyed it, especially when it was his own show and when he was not sharing a show with Sam Cedar. I thought that he was very insightful. As many have noted, he had a very good background in the social sciences. He was quite a social theorist and a strong background in history as well. And he had an interest in many areas that I have an interest in. And he had a lot of knowledge that was very broad. His friends say it was quite deep as well. And I suppose, what I'll do now to start off with, I think, is I'll share a Common Dreams article concerning Michael, but there were a lot of articles like that sometime today. Hang on a second. I thought there were sounds coming from Bonnie's end, and they were a little bit distracting. But it looks like they've stopped, so that's okay. So this Common Dreams article is by Jake Johnson. And the headline says that the death of Michael Brooks is being mourned by the progressive community, and that he was, quote, a passionate fighter for justice. Here's a picture, of Michael. He had his own show. He was also a co-host on the Sam Cedar show. And he wrote for Jacobin as well. And the article says that the community is mourning the sudden passing Monday of 36-year-old talk show host and author Michael Brooks. I've read various places, 37-year-old. What seems clear is he was born in 1883, and he died in 2020. I don't know the dates exactly, so I can't say whether he was 36 or 37, but he was very, very young from my standpoint, which to me makes his death a really tragic thing. 36-year-old talk show host and author Michael Brooks, whose incisive political commentary, humor, and passionate commitment to building a more just and equal world through international solidarity made him a cherished voice of the left. It is with a heavy heart that we announce the unexpected passing of Michael Brooks, a son, brother, friend, and true comrade to so many, due to a sudden medical condition. And it evidently was that. It was evidently thrombosis in a vein in his neck that killed him. And the blood clot was very sudden, It came without any warning, of course. It was just one of those very, very sudden things, apparently. He was live streaming last night. And this happened suddenly after his live stream, and it couldn't have been long after the live stream because there was a comment on here about it. Okay, and I was on from 9 to about 11 last night. And he was on earlier in the evening. So it was very, very sudden. The Majority Report, a daily progressive talk show that Brooks co-hosted, said in a statement posted to Twitter on Monday evening that Michael believed in bringing people together in the struggle for love and justice, fighting for all poor and working people, the struggle that he understood to be global, unquote. Quote again, he knew the only way we could do this was by bringing people together together. It made his life's work bring people from different backgrounds and countries together, unquote. And Brooks said, I think that's a misquote there. I don't think it was Brooks who said it. I think it was the Majority Report. But it said, quote, we hope you join us in honoring him by continuing that work. And that was probably a tweet by Sam Cedar himself. And the aphorism, the rest in power, was tweeted at the address, of Michael Brooks. Here's a picture of Michael Brooks, and Lula da Silva. A few years ago, Michael started to follow the career, of Lula. And he was very active in communicating with him. And he defended Lula and did what he could to try to get him out of jail. Finally, he went to Brazil and he met Lula who was his hero, he got to meet and to interview a lot of his heroes. He was a very, very good interviewer. I saw that in the programs of his that I watched. And his relationship to Lula must have been a high point, in his life. But he built friendships and close relationships with many people. And we heard from a lot of those people today. He was appreciated, by many others. At one point, he had a conflict with Tim Black, but Tim Black came to appreciate the contributions, of Michael, and the way he approached things from an intellectual point of view. And he provided a tribute to Michael today on his show, as did Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty on The Rising. Also Nomiki Konst, who spoke to a number of people on her show, who had really wonderful memories, of Michael Brooks. There were many people who commented on his passing today. It was a very sad day for the progressive left. David Dowell gave one of the tributes. On the Nomiki show, the Crystal Ball appeared. And also Brianna Joy Gray, Harvey J.K., and others, as well. Lula tweeted and said, quote, this year I met this young American, a journalist, who turned out to be a friend, who I thought that we would meet again. How is it possible? He tweeted late on Monday, quote, my heart and prayers go to his family and friends. May his passion for social justice be remembered and inspire people around the world. So he was not a person that I knew. But I wish I had known him. I had the feeling we had a lot in common in relation to our somewhat philosophical approach to politics and our knowledge of sociology and history, as well as knowledge, of politics. So I felt a certain kinship of him, with him, a certain peer point of view. Jude knew more about politics of Ecuador than the highest paid CNN analyst knows about the U.S. Tweeted at Nando Vila, who was a friend, of Brooks, and who also appeared on the Nomi Key show tonight. Okay, and Emma Vigeland tweeted, "I can't believe I'm writing this. Michael Brooks was pure light. He was just good to his core. He was fun-loving, brilliant, generous, thoughtful, loyal, open. He was building a better world. He was my true friend. He was an oasis. I am heartbroken. I will never forget his laugh." And there are photos, okay, of Emma with Michael, okay, and with other people. 4 very nice photos. And a tweet from Nando. And Brianna Joy Gray. And a tweet from Abby Martin. "Gutted to learn. I lost my friend today. He was not only an amazing journalist and passionate fighter for justice, he was funny, genuine, and selfless. Please tell people how much they're loved and supported, because you might not get another chance. My heart hurts so much." There's a picture of Michael, okay, and Abby. Bhaskar Sankara, who's the editor, okay, of Jacobin, wrote that Michael sought to make the world rather than be made by it. That much is true, but I'll remember more than his politics. I'll remember someone who was deeply human, someone who made an impact in those parts of life which politics never quite solves. Sankara wrote. I quote again, "He was all these things, and he was also an ambitious winner. Someone who wanted to take on our callous rulers and help to build a just world, one where accidents of birth don't condemn condemn the millions to misery." And then there's a correction. A previous version of this article incorrectly stated Brooks was 37 when he passed. He was 36. So I'm certain now that 36 is right. He had not yet turned 37 when he died so suddenly and so tragically. So I wanted to acknowledge Michael's passing and to provide a feel for the tributes to him which appeared today. It certainly was a very, very sad day for the left, not just in this country, but in many nations that he spoke about, that he wrote about, and that he reported about. He will certainly be greatly missed. So next, to have a change of pace, and I'm afraid not a very pleasant change of pace. What I wanted to do was to call attention to one small aspect of the Chris Wallace interview over the weekend with the master of disaster, Donald J. Trump. Oh, one of the things that hits you repeatedly about Donald Trump, okay, and the presidency, okay, of Donald Trump is Donald Trump's classic use of the big lie. During the run-up to the Second World War, and during the Second World War, and during the aftermath of the Second World War, one thing that struck people concerning totalitarianism, both fascist totalitarianism and communist totalitarianism as well, is that the dictators in these particular systems were assiduous in their lying. First of all, their lying was constant. But what really stood out was the bigness of their lies. How opposed the lies of the dictators were to the truth on the ground. How much they were devoted to distorting the real world. So Donald Trump, in conversation with Chris Wallace, started to talk about how good things were here in the United States. And he made the statement that we were among the best in the world, and actually the best in the world when it came to having a low fatality rate due to the virus, that we'd accomplished so much that we were close to the best in the world. And I know I've covered the facts quite a few times here, but not in the context of talking about the big lie and Donald Trump's use of the big lie, which is very, very relevant now, because even today, when the experience of a Navy veteran in Portland who was beaten by the police and pepper sprayed in the eyes, he was beaten by Trump's thugs, by the secret police. And Trump, in talking about that, characterized Christopher David, the Navy veteran. He characterized him as an operative, smeared him as an operative. Now, Trump had no knowledge of who Chris David was. He didn't know a thing about the man. The first thing out of his mouth was a lie. He was going to lie about him. He was going to smear about him. How many times have we seen this from Trump? But getting back to the lie about the fatality rate in the United States, now Chris Wallace on the spot corrected Trump. And he pointed out that we stood seventh from the top in the whole world. Seventh from the top And you can even see when you're looking at the new deaths, this is deaths in one day. We had more than 1,000. We had 1,111. In Brazil, there were more, 1,346. In India, 671. Russia, 153. But as you go down this particular list, you see that yesterday alone, we were second from the top in the whole world. And we don't have to scroll down the list too far to find that deaths in other countries are a small fraction of what we are experiencing. And of course, there are many, many countries that yesterday had 0 deaths as far as we know. We're getting down to the 0 death countries now. "88 countries now, and there are what? 240 countries in the world? All the other countries have 0 deaths. China had 0 deaths. The Netherlands had 0 deaths. Kazakhstan had 0 deaths. Singapore had 0 deaths. Austria had 0 deaths. South Korea had 0 deaths. Sizable countries had 0 deaths yesterday. Just look at it. That's the truth. We had 1,111 deaths. Thailand had 0 deaths. 69.8 million people in Thailand. They had 0 deaths. But the real measure, the key indicator, is deaths per million. As I've said on many occasions, I'm going to share the screen for you now so we can all see that. So you can see San Marino, that really doesn't count. It's the number 1 country, but it's only got 34,000 people in it. So in a sense, it really doesn't count. Also, Andorra has more people, but only 77. So to have 673 deaths per million, 1,238 deaths per million, they're not sizable enough to count. Belgium, however, among countries that are sizable enough to be somehow representative in some sense, the number 1 country is Belgium. They were hit hard early on. And by the way, yesterday they had only 5 deaths. But they're at 846 per million. The UK is at 669. Now, the UK is second among nations that we can truly say count. Spain is at 608 per million. Notice, when deaths are computed per million, it controls for size. Okay, so the UK, that early on was not doing a very good job, shot up to a very high number of deaths per million. Spain also had problems at first, and they shot up to 608 per million. But look at the new deaths in Spain yesterday. Well, for that matter, okay, in the UK, they're sizable at 110, but that's 1/10 of what we had. Spain had only 2 deaths, and Italy only 15 deaths. These are all nations that have more deaths per million than we have. Sweden, which is a little notorious for not making a very vigorous response to the virus, continues to grow at 5.59, but they had only 20 deaths yesterday. France is still suffering. Oh, I'm sorry, they had 10 deaths yesterday. France had 13 deaths yesterday. I was looking at new cases, sorry. Sweden had only 10 new cases yesterday, evidently. Anyway, France is at 462 per million. So there we are at number 8. If we look at countries that count, we have 438 deaths per million. Now, last week, if you recall, we checked on this, we were only at 425. So we grew a lot in 1 week by 13 deaths per million, indicating, of course, that it's getting worse here. But there are countries that have done worse than we over the whole period of the invasion of COVID-19 into our societies. And look at all the countries that are nowhere near us. Some of them are starting to increase their deaths per million now. For example, Brazil. Brazil is growing very, very fast. They have a slaughter going on there with a Trump-like figure who's running the country. We have, as we scroll down, we just see the magnitude of the lie that Trump has told here. The magnitude of the lie. I always like to scroll down to the very bottom. Not quite at the very bottom. But I like to get to Taiwan. Because Taiwan has 24 million people. It's sizable, and we know we can trust their statistics. They have 0.3 of a fatality per million. If we had 0.3 of a fatality per million, then we would have something like 33 deaths in the United States. If off the top of my head arithmetic, is correct, 33 deaths in the United States. And we have, of course, in terms of total deaths in the United States, We now, according to Worldometrics, have almost 145,000 deaths. So divide 145,000 by 33. That is the numerical magnitude of Trump's big lie when he said that we were the best in the world. So that is a lie whose magnitude is 4,394 times of the truth. He lied by a ratio of 4,394 to 1. That is how big a lie it was. It's like you saying that you have $5 billion when you're really worth only $1 million. Who knows? I mean, maybe Trump is faking it all. And he says he is a $5 billionaire, but he's only worth $1 million. I don't know. Of course, he might be negative. Anyway, I thought it was interesting to look at the numerical magnitude of the big lie of Donald Trump in saying that we were best in the world when it comes to fatalities. Donald Trump, like other dictators that he is a wannabe of, is a fantastically big liar. Okay, I'll go on to my next subject in just a minute, but I wanted to say hi to Dale Weaver and Kay. And just go over a few comments first. Kay says FBI arrested the Ohio Speaker of the House and others on RICO charges today. More to come to. Glad they got busted. Steve Wolfbrand says hi. Lana says, Kay, that guy from Ohio was a jerk. I saw Dr. Kaboob's video. Susan says, so sudden. It's always hard, especially so young. The Minority Report was hard to watch today. Cases Ohio is full of GOP jerks. Glad they finally are going down. And Carmen says, ducking in, may not be able to stay, just want to say hi and hear a bit of good sense, balance, and knowledge. Wow. Kay says, it was a sad show today, Susan. Lana says, I only saw him a few times, just didn't get plugged in, I guess, but he was a good guy and way too young. Yeah. Steve says, damn, 36-year-old. Blood clots are also a fatal symptom of COVID. Susan says 37. Stephen says, hi, everyone. And Avril says, hello, handsome, thanks for coming. And Lana says, I didn't know he had a thing with Tim Black. It was just an encounter with Tim Black, I think, on somebody else's show. And he said something that I guess made Tim look a little bad. Okay, and he did it with his humor, his sense of humor. Okay, and his ability to mimic people. But Tim grew to really appreciate his sense of humor and his way of handling things with people. I'm speaking, okay, of Michael Brooks's way of handling things. Avril says, was Mr. Brooks a proponent, okay, of MMT? I seem to recall that he had a short interview with Stephanie, okay, at one point. Okay, I think that, I don't think he was hostile to MMT. I don't think he knew very much about it. Steve says, what kind of thing with Tim Black, Lana? Okay, it's as I just said. To check on it, just go to Tim Black's show today. Susan Mildred says, I liked his shows with Adolph Reed. Susan said, I think he was skeptical about MMT, but said he was open to learning more. I think that's the kind of guy he was. I think he was skeptical about a lot of things. He took a critical approach to things. He was very friendly about it, but he took a critical approach to things. But he was open. I got that impression from him that he was open. Avril says, thanks, Susan. Deborah said, I didn't know this dude, but he sounded like a great person. Steve Wolfbrand said, I didn't know him either. Carmen says, and progressives are so rare, any loss stinks. I don't think stings. It does stink too, though. Isn't Cedar the guy that was feuding with Jimmy Dore? I think it's feuding, okay, with Jimmy Dore. Okay, but I don't think that Michael was feuding with Jimmy Dore. So Carmen says, wow, Brianna is gorgeous. Yeah, Brianna is gorgeous. And apparently, she's always struck me. I've watched her speak, on many occasions, interviews, on many occasions. I've always thought of her as really, really good person. Steve says, I love Tim Black, but the list of the progressives that he's alienated is long. I don't think he alienated Michael Brooks. No, I don't think he alienated Michael Brooks. I think there was an initial encounter which didn't go so well, but I think later he came to appreciate Michael Brooks. And maybe it was vice versa. I don't know. I didn't get the impression that they had a bad relationship at the end. I don't think that's where Tim Black was coming from. I don't think I'd describe it as a falling out either, Lana. Susan said, I watched him a lot when he was reporting on Bernie. Then I met him at the Harvard event when he was on a panel with Cornel West, Crystal Ball, Katie Harper, and Nomiki Konst. I spoke with him afterwards and told him he should interview Fadl on MMT and global sustainability. He said he would look into it. Now, he would have been really interested in what Fadl had to say had he gotten into it. And Russell says, master of disaster, laugh out loud. And Lana Dell says, assiduous perseverance. Yes, in his own way, he's assiduous, an assiduous liar. Steve says, Lana, there are many, Nico House, Jamal Thomas, H.A. Goodman. Carmen says, grandiosity is the hallmark of narcissists. Dr. Sam Vaknin said it best, this is the age of the narcissist. if the masks come off, they are defeated. Mary Trump was trying to expose that. He says, I hope that the Michael Brooks partners keep his show going with his name still on it. I hope so too, but I don't know if they're going to be able to. And Trump said that he wishes Giseline Maxwell the best. WTF. Stephen says, I don't believe a word he says. It's not even worth listening to him. He knows nothing, and worst of all, he doesn't care unless it's about him. I know. Narvel says he won't time to listen to him is for clues about where his psychopathy is heading. Steve says, a true narcissist. And Narvel says, Cuba, 0 deaths. No, Cuba's had some deaths. I think Cuba is somewhere around 6 deaths per million or 8 deaths per million. They've done extremely well. And especially for a country that's taken certain risks, they still have people traveling to other countries to help them out. Then the people come back and they come into Cuba. But Cuba was open to ships that would dock at their ports with COVID-19 people aboard, who they would take off and then treat, in Cuba. Kay says, hi, Johnny Garza. Barbara Wernick says, Tim Black has been an MMT denier. Truth, not just denied, but humiliated MMTers. Has he? Well, he never interviewed me. I don't believe he'd be able to humiliate me, but we'll see. Steve Wolfbrand says America's lost control of this virus. Contact tracing is impossible at this moment. Yes, that's right. Of all the problems in Cuba, their medical care is top rate. It is. It is really top rate, and they jumped on COVID-19, and they've tested, and they've contact traced, and they monitor people every week for any signs of COVID-19. And when they find something, they stamp it out right away. Romano says, that's why I spurn him. And Johnny Garza said, hi, just logged. Somehow I missed the notification Joe was going live. How much have I missed? Well, at that time, you missed about half an hour, I'd say. I guess I stopped my sharing at roughly 9:05, Johnny, and started talking. Kay says, Cuba has no homeless problem either. Okay, I'm ready to go there. Steve says, I've never heard Tim Black speak to MMT. He's more about racial injustice, which is why he should speak to MMT, because, of course, the MMT economists have quite a lot to say about how to get some racial justice in this country, and they are for it. They are for it. Carmen says, interferon beta in nebulizers breathing treatment is being said to save COVID patients. I think Cuba is the discoverer of this, but I'm not certain. Well, there's a recent study that's been done, in England, and they're using interferon beta. I know Cuba has been doing work, with interferon since the early 1980s, but I don't know whether they've been working with interferon beta, specifically with respect to COVID 2019. But they've used interferon successfully as an antiviral, okay, in many other cases. And they're one of the world leaders when it comes to the use, okay, of interferon. They've worked successfully with China, okay, in using interferon. China's deaths per millions, if we could trust their statistics, is only 3 per million. It's lower than Cuba right at this point. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing now because I want to touch, okay, another subject. I'll come back to these comments in a while. I'll come back to your comments, but I thought it's time now to address what's happening in the Congress, the hard games that are shaping up in the Congress when it comes to negotiation. So yesterday, Dave Dayen gave us some news. This article is called Unsanitized, 1937 Revisited. And he wrote this just yesterday. These are bronze figures at the FDR FDR Memorial in Washington. People looking for jobs, jobless people. Last year on this day, we were marveling at the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, celebrating American ingenuity that can meet any challenge. Today, we're hoping that only 800 people die from this disease that we've largely given up on containing. We also begin a critical week for the future of the U.S. economy. Dave points out that a boost to jobless aid of an additional $600 a week ends this week for most of the recipients. And he points out the Wall Street Journal managed to get two things wrong in its lead. The practical end to the benefit is July 25th or 26th, depending on how a state calculates its work week. And it's more like 32 million receiving or set to receive benefits, not 25 million. So the Wall Street Journal gets it wrong twice in one article. One-time checks were sent out long ago. The lack of state and local fiscal aid has already set in motion layoffs and triggered premature reopenings, as is clearly seen in, for example, California breaking its own guidelines to reopen. Why did California do that? Because it's been suffering heavy revenue losses from being shut down. Small business failed, and the expected federal aid has not arrived. Small business failures have accelerated, and states are headed back into lockdown, either formally or functionally. If you only look through June, you see an economy bouncing back, but economic indicators are all looking bad this month. For those who haven't noticed, it's July 21st in this month. 21st day of the month. With this backdrop, Congress is set to begin to negotiate on the next relief bill. This is unfolding exactly the way the CARES Act unfolded. Republican leaders are huddling in the White House, preparing to write a bill without outside input, which they will then present to Democrats as if the House passed HEROES Act never existed. Parts of that wish list, like hazard pay for essential workers, seem all but dead. Instead, Mitch McConnell is dictating terms. My comment here is, when you're talking money bills, Such bills are constitutionally supposed to originate in the House, not in the Senate. The House is supposed to take the lead on money bills. Where has Nancy Pelosi been? Where has she been? Why isn't she on YouTube now informing the Senate and informing the president that there is a money bill that has been passed regarding COVID relief? It is the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act has been on the floor now for how long? A month and a half? I think what Nancy Pelosi needs to do is to get up and say, look, the HEROES Act has been around now for a month and a half. You guys haven't had the time even to consider it. If you don't consider it within 2 days, if you don't start negotiating in relation to the HEROES Act within 2 days, I am going to pass the Automatic Boost to Communities Act. And that's going to be the basis for our negotiation. What do you think of that, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump? That's what I would do. That's one approach that I would take. Dave goes on, here's what those terms look like. It starts with a broad release from liability for corporations whose workers and customers get sick. That's priority number one. Not stopping the virus. Now, this is not according to Dave, actually. This is what Dave says, of course, but he's characterizing what the Republicans and Mitch are saying. Not stopping the virus, but stopping lawsuits about the virus. The temporary, quote-unquote, liability would last 4 years for businesses who make, quote, reasonable, unquote, efforts to follow public health guidelines, of which there aren't any at the federal level, so that's not much of a hurdle, and adds damage caps just in case a couple of cases sneak through. The measure would include hospitals and schools, so parents should know that the party pressuring schools to reopen also wants to give them immunity from sickening your child and potentially you. Keep in mind that there are next to no lawsuits right now. The other thing Nancy Pelosi should immediately do is to say to Mitch McConnell and to Donald Trump, no, there is not going to be any release from liability for corporations whose workers and customers get sick. That's an incentive for these businesses to have a death trap, and we are not having it. That is non-negotiable. You're not getting that. If you don't want to pass a relief bill, that's fine, but we're not making workplaces a death trap. If you don't want to pass a relief bill, that's on you. The country will punish you for it in November. But no relief bill is going to have a release from liability from corporations whose workers and customers get sick. That's what Nancy Pelosi has to say right now. Right now. And she also needs to say the bill that's going to be the framework for negotiation is the bill that comes out of the House. So save your work and save your breath, Donald Trump, and save your work, Mitch McConnell, because nothing gets passed unless it comes out of the House first. We want a leader, not a little mouse. The measure would include, going on with the article, hospitals and schools, so parents should know that the party pressuring schools to reopen also wants to give them immunity from sickening your child and potentially you. Keep in mind, there are next to no lawsuits right now. There will be some form of funding for schools, probably attached to reopening, and probably including private schools. More money will be thrown at testing and vaccine R&D unless the White House sabotages it, which is good. But if the public is paying for creating a vaccine, there should be no need to pay again to receive it. Don't tell that to Wall Street, which is bidding up every pharma company that updates its vaccine development. Senator McConnell wants to reappropriate the $130 billion left in the PPP, which, if trends are any guide, will get larger over the next couple of weeks, for what seems to be a second grant to businesses with deep revenue losses. Another bailout for the corporations and nothing for people in the Senate version of this bill. Banks are also pushing to just forgive the initial PPP loans because they don't want to do a stitch of work and verification that the money was spent within the program guidelines. Dave says, I don't see what they do anyway. Verification was on the business borrower, but uploading that to the Small Business Administration is apparently too big a burden for $18 billion in fees. Missing from this is any state and local fiscal aid. Republican leaders say they just want to free up whatever's left from the paltry $150 billion given out in the CARES Act to fill budget holes. That won't be close to enough. Unemployment assistance is likely to be lower, possibly tempered by a one-time check or a signing bonus to return to work. On the other hand, Republicans will likely buckle to Trump's demand for a payroll tax cut, thereby helping out workers who have a job more than 30 million plus who don't, in the name of a targeted stimulus. Chuck Schumer has implicitly threatened that a bill written inside Senator McConnell's office won't get any Democratic support and therefore won't break the 60-vote threshold. But he used the CARES Act, the bill that got us in this position in the first place, as a model for how to proceed. The whole thing has got me thinking about 1937. The Social Security Act started collecting payroll taxes that year, even though payouts did not begin until 1940. Franklin Roosevelt compounded this quirk in the calendar by deciding to eliminate the budget deficit, including cuts to the Public Works Administration and the Works Progress Administration, and even cutting unemployment benefits. The result was a recession inside the Great Depression. At least Roosevelt had 4 years of gains behind him before foolishly venturing into austerity and finding that the economy was too sick to support it. We've had 2 decent JAWS reports and a resumption of cases that blocks any further recovery. The economy can't even support a normal cycle of spending right now, let alone a sharp reduction in income for 30 million plus unemployed people. We have a week for everyone to come to their senses. But there is no sign the Republicans are coming to their senses, as we see from an article in Common Dreams that I will now share with you. It was published today, July 21st, 2020, and was written by Jake Johnson. The progressives demand Democrats reject, quote, outright shameful GOP plan to raid Social Security and cut unemployment benefits. I don't know about raiding Social Security. I think you know how I feel about raiding Social Security. That is not the MMT view. Anyway, progressives are pushing Democratic congressional leaders to forcefully oppose the Senate GOP's coronavirus stimulus legislation after new reporting Monday revealed the package is likely to include a payroll tax cut, plus a reduction in enhanced unemployment payments, conditions on school funding, and little aid to state and local governments. We've just been over that, of course. Quote, after weeks of sitting on their hands and doing nothing while infections and deaths rise and tens of millions of people fear an imminent economic catastrophe, the reported plan Senate Republicans put out today would be laughable if it wasn't so outright shameful and harmful, said Care in Action, Community Change Action, Indivisible, Move On, and Greenpeace in a joint statement Monday. The advocacy groups called on Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, to reject this plan outright. Yeah, I think it should be dead on arrival in the House. Quote, the plan put forth by Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans will do nothing but double down on the failed policies that put corporate profits before workers and families and helped us get here in the first place, the group said. It is not a good faith starting point to negotiations. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy confirmed to reporters Monday the plan being crafted in Senator Mitch McConnell's office will include a cut to the payroll tax, a funding mechanism for Social Security, and Medicare. It's one of the issues that we're proposing, said Kevin McCarthy. An anonymous White House official told Roll Call that the Republican proposal under consideration would defer payment of the payroll tax to a later date, so people who are not being payroll taxed now will have the pleasure of paying double later on. But of course, they pointed out Congress would then have the option of waiving the payback requirement with separate legislation. Why would they want to do that? Because then they could say that it was the Democrats who were raiding the Social Security Trust Fund. In other words, if they waived the payback, then they would be raiding the Social Security Trust Fund. And if they refused to waive the payback, then the Democrats would be in the position of having people pay double a little later on, giving the Republicans something to run on. You see the beauty of this from the Republican point of view. Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, whose sell-by date, in my view, has long since passed, said in a statement Monday that the Trump, she's very nice, by the way. I happen to have met her at one point. That was an unkind comment on my part. She's fought the good fight for Social Security for years and years and years. I happen to think her strategy and tactics, are in error, but that was no reason for me to say something unkind about her. So, that the Trump GOP pushed for a payroll tax cut amounts to an effort to raid the Social Security system's dedicated revenue as a pathway to destroying it. Folks, there is no dedicated revenue. There is no dedicated revenue. There was an accounting ledger that was credited with the Social Security contributions, but those contributions themselves went into general revenue and are spent as Treasury spending goes along during each period of Treasury spending. There is no revenue that exists in any Social Security trust fund. Quote, if the money lost in payroll contributions is replaced with general revenue, Social Security will still be a target, warned Altman. Currently, Social Security doesn't add a penny to the deficit. Rating its dedicated revenue is set up to the claim that it must cut in the name of reining in the debt. So why don't we fight the battle about the debt? I've written a book called Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America. It's about using platinum coins. In part, it's about using platinum coins to pay back the debt. Why not have a fight over that? Why endlessly go over the same silly claim that we need to, that saying we have to cut Social Security in order to rein in the debt? We don't have to cut Social Security. We just, in Congress, have to appropriate the funds for Social Security and then have the Treasury worry about coming up with those funds. The Treasury has options. It can come up with the funds as taxes come in. It can come up not because it's using the tax money, but because when the tax money is destroyed by the Federal Reserve, then the Treasury account is credited with entirely new money created by the Federal Reserve. That's what happens. So when tax debts are settled, the revenue is destroyed, but new money is added to the Treasury spending account. When bond revenue comes in and when that is settled, the bond revenue is destroyed, but new money comes into the Treasury spending account. When coins are deposited at the Federal Reserve or are sold to the Federal Reserve, as the term, is often used, the public enterprise fund account of the mint is credited with the amount of the coin seigniorage. Actually, the amount of the coin, the face value of the coins. Then the public enterprise fund account can be swept for the seigniorage, the profit, the difference between the face value of the coins and the cost of minting the coins and getting them up to the Federal Reserve in New York. Then that seigniorage can be swept into the Treasury spending account, at any time. So those are three ways in which the Treasury spending account can be topped up by the Fed. There are other ways too. One other way that is very easy for Congress to do is that when Congress passes its appropriations, it could have a little clause saying that the Federal Reserve will top up the Treasury spending account with the amount of this appropriation. And the Federal Reserve will also top up the Treasury spending account with the amount that is necessary to repay all the federal debt and all the interest falling due on that debt during the period of the appropriation. Two sentences can be added to every appropriation bill, and new money would get created by the Fed to allow the Treasury to spend whatever Congress appropriates. There is no issue about paying for Social Security. All that's really necessary is to make sure that Social Security money is appropriated 1 year ahead of the time that money is needed. The trust funds can be gotten rid of. They're a fiction anyway. There is no money in them. They are accounting records. But anyway, Nancy goes on in this quote, raiding its dedicated revenue is set up to the claim that it must be cut in the name of reining in the debt. Kevin McCarthy's statement today means that every Republican member of Congress supports defunding Social Security unless they quickly and explicitly denounce their party's plan to raid our earned benefits, unquote. Now that's a highly political statement. It is really not news. Every Republican member of Congress has supported defunding Social Security for years and years and years now. Is there any one of them that supports not defunding Social Security? What's new about that? They all want to privatize Social Security. They should be beaten over the head with it every day of every year. But they are the enemies of Social Security. Senator Grassley, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, was among the few Republicans who publicly voiced skepticism on Monday about the payroll tax cut, calling the proposal, quote, a public relations problem for the GOP. If it wasn't a PR problem, Chuck Grassley would be down with it. He wants to defund Social Security too. He's always wanted to. Quote, Social Security people think we're raiding the Social Security fund, unquote, said Grassley, to which Social Security Works Executive Director Alex Lawson responded, because they're planning on raiding it, they're going to take the dedicated revenue away from Social Security. The definition of raiding, the dedicated revenue. There's no dedicated revenue. There's a record of how much the Treasury Department owes to Social Security. That's all. That's all there is. But it doesn't really matter how much is owed to Social Security, because no money would be paid for Social Security if Congress refused to appropriate the funds for Social Security anyway. And all the money necessary would be spent for Social Security if Congress was to appropriate money for Social Security. So all we have to do every year is make sure that Social Security appropriations sail through Congress. And we have to make sure that there'll be very grave consequences for any congressperson who votes against the Social Security appropriation. That's what we have to do. We don't need devices like these non-existent trust funds. Schumer and Pelosi are expected to meet with White House officials Tuesday to formally kick off their negotiations over the stimulus legislation. The Trump administration is advocating a relief package that contains roughly $1 trillion in new programs, though officials are expected to use budget gimmicks to make the initial package slightly larger. By comparison, the $3 trillion HEROES Act, passed by the Democrat-controlled House in May, proposed more than $1 trillion. Sorry, it was 2 months since the passage. More than $1 trillion just for state and local governments as they face pandemic-induced budget crises. Quote, the bill is expected to omit new aid that Democrats have sought for cities and states, instead allowing governors and local leaders more flexibility to spend the $150 billion already allocated, the Post noted. That's ridiculous. The GOP plan, the GOP plan is going to create another 3 million people unemployed, maybe more. The GOP plan will also likely include another round of $1,200 direct stimulus payments and a cut to the $600 per week increase in unemployment benefits, which is set to expire at the end of the week. During a private White House meeting on Monday, according to the Post, Trump criticized the enhanced unemployment benefit, saying it never should have been agreed to in the first place. From what we understand, if it hadn't been agreed to in the first place, Trump's economy would be far worse than it is. And let's say it had only been $200 a week extra. That economy would be even more in the tank than it already is now. From what we understand from press reports, Senator McConnell's bill will prioritize corporate special interests over workers and Main Street businesses. How come the article doesn't mention that the HEROES Act prioritized lobbyist special interests over workers? That's what Nancy Pelosi did. But of course, Schumer said this in a floor speech on Monday afternoon. It will fail to adequately address the worsening spread of the virus. There are currently between 20 and 30 million unemployed Americans. Bullshit. There are more than that on unemployment insurance. There are 40 million on unemployment insurance. How can there be only between 20 and 30 million unemployed Americans? And from all accounts, the Republican bill will not do nearly enough for them. And Senator Wyden tweeted about this. Give everyone else a fake tax cut they'll have to repay after the election. Josh Bivens, director of research at the Economic Policy Institute, said Monday, it sounds like Senate Republicans want to go cheap and cruel on by far the most important bits of the economic response to COVID, enhanced unemployment insurance benefits, and aid to state and local governments. Hard not to see that as Republicans in the Senate administration, having given up trying to fix problems and shifting to attempts to hobble the political prospects of the next Congress and administration. Bivens added, we deserve a lot better than this, quote unquote. Well, we need to talk about strategy and tactics. I've already talked about the tough position I think Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer need to take. But I also don't think they should start to negotiate from the HEROES Act. It's a terribly flawed bill, and better than the Republican bill, but it's a terribly flawed bill. It actually pays the lobbyists to lobby Congress against our interests. It doesn't provide for a job guarantee. It does not provide for a basic income for people. It does not provide for assistance for the duration of the COVID crisis, which would allow people to stay home so we can bring the coronavirus under control and COVID-19 under control. The HEROES Act is grossly inadequate, as almost everything Nancy Pelosi does is. What the Democrats have to do now is get tough. Go to Jaya Powell's bills she has on the floor of the House now. The bill to guarantee everyone's payroll who was working before the crisis started, insofar as it's possible to guarantee that particular payroll. And as for the rest, pass a Medicare for All bill, at least for the duration of the crisis. At least for the duration of the crisis. An enhanced Medicare for All bill, and pass the Automatic Booster Communities Act. Right now. By the way, I wouldn't have any objection to giving Trump his payroll tax cut, to use this as a negotiating piece and say, we'll give him his tax cut, his payroll tax cut. And it can be a full payroll tax cut. Both a tax cut for the corporations and a tax cut for their workers who would not have to come up with Social Security payments. But that must be paid for through the use of one platinum coin. In other words, the Treasury spending account must be topped up with the proceeds from one platinum coin deposited in the Public Enterprise Fund account at the New York Fed. That coin to be generated by the U.S. Mint on orders of the Secretary of the Treasury, based on the authority provided to the Secretary by the 1996 Coin Law. So Pelosi should give Trump his tax cut on that condition, that he agree to its being paid for immediately through use of the coin law. And she should also offer to Trump a very liberal stimulus payment of $2,400 a person, with the proviso that he can put his damn name on the checks. Offer him that. See if he'll take it. Be a little clever. Be a little clever in your negotiations. Use the power you have. Use the role of the House as the originator of money bills. Go forward before you retire. Or retire now in the middle of the term, so somebody with a little imagination can take over in your place. Make this go viral, folks. Make this go viral. Because Nancy Pelosi doesn't know how to handle these Republicans. Back to your comments. Let's see if we can catch up. Anyway, I meant to say about the interferon beta. There was a study done in England where it was used. It was on John Campbell's program today. He covered it. It was said to have greatly improved the outcomes of 79% of the patients. I think there were 112 patients in the study. Altogether, it was a small sample study, but 79% of the patients had their outcomes very seriously improved. And among the people who were given the interferon, there was not a single fatality. So the results of this study were inconclusive because the sample was too small. But it was still a very promising study and screams for a higher volume study. And Johnny Garza says, good, Tim Black seemed a bit antagonistic about MMT mainly because I think Steve pressed him on it years ago. I think partly it was that, and partly because Steve's following pressed him on it in something of a discourteous way. But hasn't Steve recently been on Tim's show? I had the impression that he was on Tim's show and they buried the hatchet, but I may be mistaken about that. Barbara Wernick said he's pretty much told me to STFU about MMT. I've never listened to him since. I never will. Avro says Barbara Wernick, attack girl. Then he changed it to Barbara Wernick, at a girl. And Johnny Garza said, I've always said Steve's attitude is the right attitude to have. If you're not pissed on what's been going on, then there is something wrong with your moral compass. I agree, there's something wrong with your moral compass. But even though you're pissed at what is going on, it's important not to get overly pissed, at people and to be able to continue to talk with them. That's important. I'm afraid I scrolled down a little too fast. It's time to go back. Oh, Evelina says there's a delay, Dr. Joe. It's hard to follow. Probably my speakers probably slipped again. Yeah. For some reason, the system keeps resetting itself. Okay, I set everything to go through my microphone. And for some reason, things are shifting in midstream. I think I may be missing some comments here. Johnny Garza says Michael Brooks was on a higher level, especially in the area of geopolitics. Barbara Wernick said no, he was not open to MMT. Steve DeVore says, I listened to his cousin Mary's book, and he's all about himself and pleasing his father, who's now dead. His dad was impossible to please, so he does things over the top to get his attention, according to Mary, and still does. Johnny Garza says, yeah, Brianna, yep, I agree. And Susan Eldridge has a question mark. Lana says, I agree about, but Brianna seems like a good soul. She was very good for Bernie, wasn't she? Carmen says, oh, okay, thank you for that feedback. I was beginning to think it was my device. Catherine Tokarska says, if you listen to Michael in this lecture, you hear aspects of MMT in one part. Sorry, did not bookmark it. Pretty sure he's talked to Steph. And Catherine Tokarska says, Michael Brooks was not anti-Jimmy Dore, that's Sam. Yeah, that's what I believe, too. Johnny Garza says, right, Catherine. Barbara says, I think you're wrong about Tim Black Joe. I may be, Barbara. I don't watch Tim on a religious basis, so I'm not. I mean, I probably watch him about a couple of times a week, so I'm not fully into his likes, okay, and dislikes. I'm much more into Jamarl Thomas, actually, than I am um, into Tim Black. Okay, I like Nico House, too, even though Nico has been, to say the least, not friendly to MMT in the past. I still like many of the things Nico has to say. Lana says, Steve, oddly enough, the first time I heard taxes don't fund spending was when Steve Grumbine went on Tim Black's show in August of 2016. Steve DeVore, I just realized you're talking about Trump. Barbara says, I think you're wrong about Tim Black's show. And again, I say, I might well be. And Johnny Garza says, I've always argued that if your political commentary about who you are isn't in the context of MT, you're missing the whole point and our major strengths in writing this show. Barbara, wrong about what? Here's a test caller to Tim's show on Friday and mention MMT and check his reaction. Of course, we're all respectful here, and yet you'll see the antagonistic attitude from his response. Brooks was a big fan of Wolf, and he had another professor on who was saying all revenue comes from business. I think eventually he would have interviewed Kelton. He was not afraid to evolve in his thinking. That's my impression also. Barbara Wernick says his integrity. NK says, hi, Dolores. And Barbara says, Lana Dell, his integrity. Johnny Garza says, games, damn them games. Steve says, Cuba's medical research is first class as well. Avril says, Donald Trump wants to end funding for COVID testing and tracing. Kay says he's such an idiot. Joanne says, interferon can be debilitating. Took 2 rounds to fight Hep C. I only achieved short-term results, but I hope it will help with COVID-19. There are different kinds, of interferon. The type being talked about here is interferon beta. Not the same as interferon alpha or other types, of interferon. There's the Cuban type, of interferon, which is, I'm not sure what's that called. I've read about it, but I've forgotten. And Barbara says, Tim Black sees MMT as a cult. Supporting him is a mistake. Well, I don't generally support Tim. I do watch him occasionally, as I indicated. Johnny says, Barbara, I don't get that, but if you're right, that truly is real bad. Johnny Garza said, Pelosi's in. Pelosi isn't interested in progressive policies. That's a Democratic problem. I agree, but it's still up to us to yell at her and shout at her and harass her about it, and hoping for Shahid Buttar, as Kay Ryan says, for Congress, beats the hell out of her. Johnny says, is Joe on every night? And somebody's about to answer you, so I won't answer you right now, Johnny. Yes, that would be huge. Shahid beating Pelosi. Right now, that would be one of the hugest things. Kay says, yes, except Friday and Sunday, Johnny Garza. Right. 5 days a week. Monday through Thursday and Saturday. I try to come on, at 9 o'clock exactly on those days. Sometimes I have to postpone it for one reason, or another. Steve says every day the bucket goes to the well. One day the bottom will drop out. Bob Marley. Johnny says at 9 Eastern Time. Yes, pretty much at 9 Eastern Time. Barbara says, a lot don't get it. He said it to me, so if you need more, so be it. No, I don't need more. I don't need more, Barbara. If he said it to you, it's good for me. But only how long ago did he say it to you? Because it's possible even for Tim Black to evolve over a period of time. Steve Wolfbrand says, yes. Punctually, Doc sounds pissed. I'm really pissed at what's going on in the House. Russ says, or leaders. Johnny Garza says, but Barbara, I know like you do if we don't understand MMT, we have no chance in beating this neoliberal onslaught. This, in my opinion, is our only hope. Yes, I agree. We have to understand it. We have to make other people understand it as well. I think that Stephanie's new book has helped us a lot with this. That's why I covered it in 9 recent live streams. Of course, I've written 7 books on MMT myself, ebooks all, but I think they're pretty good. Thanks, Kay. Then I must say I believe I'm missing tomorrow's show due to watching Steve about the con. Okay, that's fine, Johnny. Johnny says, thanks, Steve. Hi, Evelina, Kay says. There's a delay, Dr. Joe, hard to follow. Hi, Evelina. Come on now. You all think the FedEx guy killed himself? Evelina waves. Barbara says payroll tax cut. Evelina says nope. Johnny says payroll tax cut is something we do after we enact the job guarantee program. Doing it now is like a slap in the face. Yes, it is, but I'd certainly be willing to deal on that, on the terms that I set forth. If Trump feels he's got to have a payroll tax cut, for the middle class, then I don't really object to that, as long as we get hours for the people who are poor and who don't have jobs. If we get that, I'm willing to trade a payroll tax cut. And by the way, I'd love to get a job guarantee too. But I think for now, if we can get the basic income that's from the Jayapal e-bill, the Automatic Boost to Communities Act, will be doing very well. And we can come back later when we have control of the Congress and control the executive and get the job guarantee program. Barbara says nothing BS policy. Half of Americans have no job. Trump wants a payroll tax cut. It's bullshit. Yes, it is bullshit. Kay says they came up with some story on the FedEx guy, but sounded fishy to me, Steve. Albert says, anyone know how to tell if cottage cheese has gone bad? It doesn't smell spoiled, but tastes a bit fizzy. But I'm hungry, as hell. I can't tell. If it tastes a bit fizzy, it might be starting to ferment. Whether that's bad for you or not, I don't know. Graham Elwood did a good show on the FedEx guy today. What is this FedEx guy stuff? Steve Wolfbrand checked the sell-by date. Evelina says now they're trying to make it about some guy who was a woman hater, an anti-terrorist. Kay says, I'll have to check that out, Steve. Thank you. Johnny says, no, Avril, don't take the chance. It would be like voting for Biden. Barbara says, laugh out loud. I won't eat it. Steve says, it usually smells bad if it's gone bad. Barbara says, say something unkind. I did say something unkind. Then I apologize for saying something unkind. But I apologized with respect to Nancy Altman. I didn't apologize with respect to Nancy Pelosi. Evelina says, not when it's just beginning to turn. Dale says, Avril, when in doubt, toss it out, make a nice cup of tea. Evelina says, cafe au lait. Steve says, yeah, I'd probably pass on that cottage cheese. Evelina says, lactate. Johnny says, well, you guys are real deep thinkers for sure, laugh out loud. Evelina says, with lactate. Man, if it's beginning to turn, I should be all right. It's all I have to eat right now. Could it work as a probiotic? I'm trying to find a reason to eat it. I can't advise on that. Barbara says, but we must believe we are currency constrained. Well, if we use overt congressional financing, we certainly won't be currency constrained. Evelina says, never, never mind, Carmen. Laugh out loud. Carmen says, already had the chamomile tea, no dinner, now I'm desperate. Steve says, well, yogurt is fermented, there's that. Dale says, hit up the neighbors, Admiral. Johnny says, Jared Bernstein is Biden's economic advisor. In a statement to the CBO, along with Dr. Randall Wray, gave his opinion. His major problem, paying the interest on the national debt. Of course, I pointed to Mosler's short video about what we owe China is a bank statement. Yes, I know that video extremely well, and I know that we only owe China a bank statement. I also know that Jared has been talked to by Stephanie over some years now, and has been on a number of panels with on Stephanie, and of course has talked to Randy too. And I think that Jared, while he likes to be seen as very, very centrist, in fact, is open to some of the MMT views. Unfortunately, not to as much of MMT as I would like to see. There was a debate a couple of years ago between Jared and Randy and Stephanie after a conference in Washington at Economists for Peace and Security. I believe it was. Anyway, Stephanie organized the conference, and a number of issues arose out of the conference. And I've covered the debate on my blog site, which is at josephmfirestone.com. I also tried to contribute to it at length, and I think I had 5 or 6 blogs on that particular debate at the time, which go over Jared's position and Stephanie and Randy's position also in considerable detail. So if you're interested in that, go to josephmfirestone.com and you'll be able to find it. Evelina says, and Steve Wolfbrand is such an enabler. Carmen says, thanks for your info, maybe just a few bites. And Johnny says, Avril, you're asking for it, just don't say we didn't tell you so. Carmen, please don't end up in the hospital again. Evelina says, don't come crying to mommy. And Avril says, they don't talk to anyone. COVID paranoia. I'm in Miami, but they go to the beach. Johnny says, right, Joe. You're absolutely right. Neoliberals along with the Democrats. Alvaro Mano, but they go to the beach, don't they? Cases, my daughter is in Fort Lauderdale, but she teaches herself or asks me. This is exactly why our focus shouldn't so much turning on our representatives blue, but rather focus on MMT, because it's that these neoliberals are at war with. Both blue and red suits. We don't always have someone who's favorable to MMT to vote for. That said, increasingly these days, we do have such people. We do have people who are running for Congress, and most of them are Democrats, are running as Democrats, who have learned, some MMT, and who are supporters, of MMT, and who know enough to call Stephanie Kelton when they have a question. And Carmen says, not in my area. I'm in the poor hood, not South Beach. Plus, everybody's sick. Johnny Garza says, Pago, no, please, not that again. Can you talk to Nancy Pelosi about anything if it doesn't have to do with Pago? But if you can pay go with congressional orders, and you can pay go with trillion-dollar coins, then you can run whatever deficits you want to run, as long as deficits are defined as Treasury spending minus tax revenue. Avril says, Evelina Pont, thanks. And Avril says, yeah, I'm not going to eat it. It warmed up and tasted like pure vinegar. Johnny says, all political commentary should be in the context of MMT. Well, not all political commentary, because there are a lot of things that don't have to do with finances. For lots of reasons. First and foremost, that it's the only perspective that can save our republic. How so? Neoliberalism seeks to tear down our institutions that allow us our sovereignty. Trans-Pacific Partnership, focusing on MMT, fights that head on. It does. In fact, I have 2 books on trade. If you go to my website at josephmfirestone.com, you will find 2 books on trade. One was about the fight over the TPP and the other trade agreements in 2015. And the other is it's entitled, Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who Needs Balanced Budgets? And in fact, I just went over this book here in 3 recent live streams. I believe it only took 3 live streams. Maybe it took 4 live streams. I had 3 live streams on Pavlina Cherner's book, and 9 live streams on Stephanie Kelton's book. Strategy and Tactics, we should go to the streets 10 times. What we're doing now, focusing in MMT. You have to focus on policy, because people just don't focus on MMT as a pure thing, of concern to them. But if you focus on an agenda, like Bernie Sanders' agenda, and then when it comes to how you're going to pay for it, you answer that with MMT-based knowledge, then I think that you can get somewhere. But as for teaching people pure MMT, that works in small numbers, 1 by 1, or in small numbers. But for the masses, it actually does not work. But if you title a book, The Deficit Myth, and you write that book very skillfully from a communications point of view, as Stephanie did, with lots and lots of emphasis on policy, then I think you will be able to get a lot of people to read it and to adopt the MMT point of view. I think Steph's book is going to be very successful for us. Steve says, Avril, if you're broke, make a GoFundMe. We can help you out. No shame. And most of us have been there at some point. Evelina says that it's time to fight head on. Johnny says, I don't think the Dems are going to do that, Joe. Their constituents will not allow it. You mean their donors. Their constituents would allow it, but their donors won't. And Kay says, at least Ohio did increase my food stamps. SMH. What does SMH mean? Shake my head. Avril says, wow, how sweet. I'll have some food on Friday. I don't fool with the internet much, but thanks for your kindness. I have some stuff, but I'm allergic to gluten and peanut butter and other affordable foods. I'll eat some garbanzo beans. Steve says, Johnny Garza shaking my head is in disgust. Johnny Garza says, oh, okay, thanks, Kay. Evelina says, make hummus. Alvaro says, I have sesame seeds, okay, but need a blender. And Russ says, gotta call it a night. See you again soon. Johnny says, good night, Russell, and so do I. Evelina says, except you have to add tahini sauce. Not sure I spelled that correctly. I'm not sure you spelled it correctly either. The way I usually see it spelled, Tahini. I'm not sure that's correct, but that's the way I often see it spelled on the jars. On jars of tahini sauce. But we usually buy sesame seed oil and garbanzo beans, and we make our own hummus by adding lots of garlic. Dolores says, good night, Russell. Carmen says, I shared the hell out of this tonight on my other account. I just can't get a video Wi-Fi signal on that damn device, but I can comment and share. Thank you, Carmen. And Johnny says, tahini goes good with fruit. Evelina says, hummus is made with garbanzo beans. Yes. Alvaro says, angels on your pillows. Johnny says, I will, Alvaro, thanks. Got lots of work to do. Can't wait to get to it. People like you, Joe, is what gives us hope. Thanks. Thank you for coming, Johnny. Wow. So at 10:36, Johnny said yes, and then he said, yes, I believe you're right, Joe. Steve has talked to Tim but lately. I seem to recollect seeing Steve talk to Tim of late. Evelina says, sounds okay now. Yeah, I didn't realize it had gone south. Avril says, hearing creepy noises in the background. I think that's Bonnie. Evelina says, smiles. Steve says, uh, um, I don't believe Grumbine has been on Tim's show in at least 4 years. Well, as we say, we think maybe he has been. Steve Wolfbrand says, I like MMT too, but supporters should try not to appear as a cult. There's other things in life. For example, jackbooted Nazis in Portland kidnapping people. Well, you heard what I had to say about that the last couple of nights, Steve, right? Avril says, how can you understand Jamal? I can't understand him. I don't know what the heck he's talking about. Oh, I don't know. He's very entertaining for me. And when he really gets going, boy, whew, he's extremely bright. When I was live streaming for RP, this was some time ago. It must have been, maybe 3 years ago. We had, I forget if it was 2 straight live streams or 3 straight live streams, going back and forth, between the sites. And each time I talked to him for 4 hours. We talked together. We conversed for 4 hours. A lot of the talking was on MMT. Okay. So at that point, I was getting some objections from the real progressive side. People said, you can't do 4-hour live streams. We have to load those up to YouTube thereafter. We can't. There just can't be 4-hour live streams. So unfortunately, I couldn't do any more live streams with Jamaro because I couldn't do 4-hour live streams. Now, since I've gone off on my own, okay, I lost a lot of my audience. Okay, and this was due to the fact that I no longer had a share army. Okay, now I have some very gracious people who help me to share, so I have a larger audience now. But Jamal has now built, okay, a very big audience, so I don't think that he would come on my show with the relatively small audiences, okay, that I have. Okay, but if he wanted to, okay, if he were to, then I would have him on as often as he would want to come on, for as long as he would want to come on, because we really had some great conversations. Avril says, okay, appear as a cult because we know the urgency, but tone police, okay, and the delivery Gestapo don't want to hear it, so they dismiss it as a cult because MMT threatens their cognitive dissonance. Look, I really don't think there are many of them who think, okay, that MMT is a cult. They've had too much interaction with MMTers over the years, okay, to believe it's a cult. But when they call it a cult, they're name calling. Oh, they don't want to debate us. They don't want to deal with us. So they name call. That's a common tactic. And they're going to do that until people call them out for it, and they're not able to name call any longer. I think now we've just about reached that point where they're going to have to discuss things in a reasonably rational way with us. Okay, at least as rational as we can be, okay, or they can be, and then maybe we'll get some things settled. Steve Gunter says, sorry, I'm late, headed down the Deutsche Bank, the rabbit hole. There must have been a long article at The Atlantic. And Johnny says, exactly, Avril couldn't have said it better. Avril says, appreciate it. And Barbara says, he is not evolved. He was adamant. We're a cult. Steve says, Joe and Kelton educate people, can't MMT. Other people, I won't mention a name, see more about their own fame than the actual cause. And Kay says, Kelton was all over YouTube a week or so ago, but has disappeared now. Well, she'll be all over it again. Okay, she has been over it not simply a week or so ago, but since her book was published on June 9th, she's been all over the tube. All over YouTube. I'm still seeing interviews of her now. So I think they still, are going on. I think they'll go on for some time to come. She did a great job with that book. Avril says, that's bullshit. And Johnny says, yes, Joe, your response on the payroll tax cut seems reasonable and makes sense. Remember, payroll tax cut is going to be stimulative. That's why it was suggested by Warren Mosler as a part of the response to the recession of 2008. His response had three parts to it. One was a payroll tax cut, and the reason why was because that could be done and implemented very, very quickly. The second part was $500 per person funding for the states, so the states would be able to keep people employed, and pay the bill. There were some other people in the MMT community who advocated for $750 a person. and still others who advocated for $1,000 a person. And the third part of the MMT response at that time was a federal job guarantee at a living wage. It wasn't specified at that time, at $15 an hour. But Bernie Sanders has sort of co-opted things since he constantly talks about $15 an hour. A lot of the MMTers have now been saying $15 an hour. I personally think that's a mistake. I think it should still be cast as a living wage because in so much of the United States, $15 an hour is not a living wage. I'd say it may be a living wage in the lowest cost area inside of the United States. The way I phrase it is you have to have a living wage. You start in the lowest cost area of the United States at $15 an hour, and then you cost adjust upward based on the CPI. So that in New York City, it might be as much as $26 an hour or $28 an hour. I don't even know how it comes out, if you weight it by the CPI. And I don't even know if we should start at $15 an hour. It may be better to start at $18 an hour. Anyway, that wage would be established by the Job Guarantee Program. That would be the living wage paid in the Job Guarantee Program. And it would become the de facto minimum wage. Steve, check Graham Elwood's live stream on that particular rabbit hole today. Avril says that's the ABC Act, right? Yeah, the Automatic Boost to Community Act is the ABC Act. Larson and others are still trying to pass Social Security expansion. I want to see Social Security expansion too, but I'm against the Elizabeth Warren $200 a month expansion. That's ridiculous. There should be a 3-year program to double Social Security payments. First of all, set a minimum, because too many people just get, they get $600 a month, $700 a month. That's baloney. We've got to have a minimum, first of all, and then past that minimum, we've got to have installments over 3 years towards a doubling of Social Security payments. So the first year, there would be a minimum set and a pay raise by 1/3. The second year, a pay raise by a second-third. And the third year, a pay raise by a third. Why? Because generally speaking, pensions over in Europe are double ours. I'm talking government pensions. If they can afford it in Europe, we can afford it here, especially because we are a monetary sovereign. Steve W., MMT affects us every day, so there aren't really other things because it's all related. Try not to use the C word. Yeah, Steve Wolfbrand, we get offended when people call us a cult because we're not a cult. We're just an approach to economics. And if you want to argue with us about that approach to economics, then fine. Let's be rational and let us discuss things. I won't call you names if you don't call me names. Joe, can you expand a bit more about overt currency spending? Not but tonight, but I have a lot of blog posts on it at my site. So it's at josephmfirestone.com, and there's all kinds of expansion there. Basically, though, as a basic thing, it just involves Congress when it appropriates spending, adding a boilerplate clause to all spending bills. And the boilerplate clause, rather short, 2 sentences, would provide for overt congressional financing by the Fed of all Treasury spending. In order to compensate for that, the Federal Reserve would simply, in settling tax payments simply destroy the tax money as it does now, but without actually adding, topping up the Treasury spending account any further. Why? Because there would be no need to top up the Treasury spending account because the appropriations money would already have been advanced by the Fed to the Treasury spending account, even before the tax revenue started flowing in. So, Joe, FedEx guy killed son and shot the husband of federal judge Esther Salas in the Epstein Deutsche Bank case. Is that a coincidence? Sounds suspicious to me. Kay says somehow these things happen in New Jersey a lot. Johnny says, okay, Joe, I will do that. Thanks. Steve says, then FedEx committed suicide, of course. Evelina says they're a cult. MMTers are not a cult. Yes, Joe, I get it now. So PAYGO works as long as, like you said. Okay, I'll have to rewind. Well, okay, I'm not really for PAYGO. Okay, in other words, I should say, okay, I completely agree with Stephanie that you do not work federal budgets based on PAYGO. What you do is you do your federal budgets based on what federal spending is needed for the public purpose. Then you pass your appropriations bill. And to every appropriations bill, you just add this overt congressional financing clause. So when Congress appropriates things, it really pays for them. It orders the Fed to provide the funding for them directly to the Treasury spending account. Because after all, according to the Constitution, Congress has the power to create the money. Okay? It never alienated that power. It delegated it partly to the Fed and partly to the Treasury. But it never alienated it. It is the constitutional power of the Congress. So let it do the funding overtly rather than the way it does now, which is covert congressional financing. It still finances things, but only covertly by giving the authority to Treasury to tax and to sell debt instruments and to create platinum coins if it wants to. Johnny says, okay, Joe, that's just what and even this says, MOB. And Johnny says, I'm buying your books ASAP like yesterday, thanks. Steve says, if you eat enough shit, you develop herd immunity. And Johnny says, yes, that's exactly what got me to listen to you about trade. Got lots of homework to do. Thanks so much. Ira says, maybe you'd like to watch Dr. Joe's live stream on his book last week. Yes, I agree, Dr. Joe. Focus on policy and how you're going to pay for it. It works. Steve says, maybe you should be a guest on Dr. Joe's show. Yes, I will, Avril. Thanks a lot. Lots of work to do and can't wait to get to it. People like you, Joe, is what gives us hope. Thanks. Thank you, Johnny, again. Steve says, I couldn't understand Joe at first either. Evelyn said, not Bonnie. She can't make creepy sounds if she tried. That's true. Tahini, you're right, Dr. Joe. In Spanish, it would be Tahini. That's right, T-H. Yeah, I should have thought of that. The J makes an H sound in Spanish, yeah, as in Jaime. However, Ohio did boot me off, okay, of Medicaid. Here we go. Boy, your comments. Avril says, agreed. Time is of the essence. However, things may shut down again. Then you'll have more time. However, Ohio did boot me off of Medicaid in this pandemic, says Kay, because I had too much money in the bank. Can't have more than $2,000 in the bank or own anything over $2,000. They work to keep you poor. I know, that's terrible. That's terrible. Yeah, that happened to Bonnie's sister also before she died. Evelina says, Tahini, you're right, Dr. Joe. Avril says, don't ever keep money in the bank if you're trying to get assistance. You've got to be untraceable. Kay says, I'm working on that now, Avril, but it should not be that way. And Johnny says, me a guest on Joe's show. He's way out of my little league. Thanks for the compliment, though. I'll just sit back and read his books to try and catch up. Well, I think I can say that most of what's in my books I learned from Warren and from Randy and from Bill Mitchell and Stephanie Pavlina, okay, and a few other people. Matt Forstatter, Scott Fullweiler. I consider Scott to do a very, very good job. But Fadl, okay, I like his work too, okay, very, very much. And Nate Tankus, okay, and Rowan Gray, I like their stuff. Talk to who for 4 hours? Talk to Jamarl Thomas. Steve says he has guests occasionally. Oh, Jamarl, yeah. Steve says, I couldn't understand Joe at first either. Steve says, Jamal's strength is breaking down the polls. He's very good at that. Johnny says, I love watching Jamal. His political instincts is right on. He says, I believe Jamal would come on your show. He might come on my show. Okay, I'd love it, okay, if he would, but I'd like to build up to a larger audience before, okay, I invite him on the show. It's, I'd like to get Tim Canova back. I had some very long and very useful conversations with Tim as well. But also, okay, I want to be able to say that I at least will be able to get 35 to 40 people who are watching. I want it to be worth their while. Johnny says, yes, name calling, that's all I have. It's fascinating to see the evolution of progress. And Avril says, for 4 hours, you're being sarcastic, of course. Laugh out loud. Johnny says, yes, Evelina. Evelina says, seriously, laugh out loud. Did you catch Fiorella, Pasta, and Johnny last night in the Portland protest? I haven't caught them yet, but I saw it covered on Jamarl's on the show today for just a little bit. And don't worry, I'll probably be seeing the coverage tomorrow. I'll certainly be looking for it. Johnny says, no, Steve, I didn't get that. I'm a subscriber at Rockfin and have to check it out. It must have been good for you to mention it. Yeah, it was very good, very good. Kay says, Larson's Act is better than Warren. Yes, I get less than $700 a month. Evelina says, why don't they get a monetary sovereign? It's probably the only sovereign thing in the land. Evelina says, my mama gets $625 a month. Steve said, I didn't call anybody a cult. I said, try not to appear that way to avoid turning off unwoke people. Touchy a bit. I'm not really that touchy, Steve. Am I touchy? Am I touchy? And Johnny Garza says, overtly got it. Still reading your books to better understand. The overt congressional financing is not in any of the books. I wrote those. I wrote 6 of the MMT books between June of 2015 and I think it was January of 2016. And my thoughts on overt congressional financing came later, I believe first in 2017, if I recall correctly. So the only place you'll find overt congressional financing actually written down is on my blog. Kay says, can we keep our Social Security income if we move to Cuba? I believe you can do that now, yes. But I won't swear to it because I haven't tried. Steve, yes, touchy. We are sick of it. Evelina says, haha, no. Steve says, but Mexico, yes. Cuba won't have us permanently. Kay says, bummer. And Johnny Garza says, is Mexico monetarily sovereign? When academics mention monetarily sovereign countries, they never mention the peso. If so, are they like, no, they're not a monetary sovereign. And the reason why they're not is because they borrowed money in dollars. And I don't believe they allow their currency to float either. So they have to borrow only in their own currency. They have to issue their own currency. They have to tax in their currency. And they have to allow their currency to float on international exchanges. And Johnny says, Venezuela, no, they also have borrowed money in dollars. And even it says the U.S. broke off diplomatic with Cuba and imposed more sanctions on the island. Yes, I believe Trump did that. Will DJT address a Navy protester in Portland? I don't know if he's tweeted about that, but he did say, in talking to somebody today, or he did tweet and say that the Navy protester was an operative. He's trying to say that he's a terrorist. The guy who stood with his hands up and allowed himself to get beat, is a terrorist. Another example of the big lie by Trump. Venezuela, little Venice for first explorers. Kay says, laugh out loud, I doubt that, Steve. Lots of rivers, streams, gain waterways. Steve says, Iron Man, that dude was badass. Yeah, I guess he weighed 280 pounds. Steve says, wow, Evelina's a smart one. She certainly is. Okay, I've now covered all your comments. Thank you for staying around. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting the show. And I will see you tomorrow night at roughly 9 p.m. Good night. Have a wonderful night. Try to stay cool. Still hot out there.